The EU Migration Pact comes into force on Friday. Joining me in the studio now, Colin Brophy, Fine Gael TD and Minister for Migration, and Matt Carthy, Sinn Féin TD for Cavan Monaghan and Chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Justice, Home Affairs and Migration. If I could start with you, Matt Carthy. The essence of this policy is that migration requires a European response, something that Sinn Féin disagrees with. Why?
So, to be very clear, there are some areas in which we absolutely need European coordination, and Sinn Féin have supported those areas, such as the sharing of information across EU member states and the returns policy. On all other areas, the areas in which you've touched, we don't need an EU migration pact to process applications in a speedy manner. We don't need a migration pact in order to enforce those decisions, and we don't need an EU pact to undo the huge dysfunction that lies at the heart of our iPass system, which has seen a small number of private entities being enriched to the tune of billions as a result of government incompetence. But crucially, and this is the point that we have made, it's the point that my own committee that I chair, the Justice Committee, raised at the pre-legislative scrutiny stage, and that Sinn Féin have consistently raised. Government themselves have continually asserted that upwards of 80% of international protection applicants don't come from within the EU. They actually come from Britain, a state in which we share a common travel area, but is completely outside of the Pact. And this Pact takes no consideration of that fact, of Ireland's unique circumstances.
Right,
and
so we should be in lockstep with Britain rather than Europe.
No, what we have to have is a bespoke migration policy that is decided by the Sovereign Parliament of this state, that can be amended and adapted as circumstances change. And we brought forward at different points in the passage of the International Protection Bill amendments that would have ensured that the bilateral agreement with Britain, which is required and which has to be part of our overall migration approach, is dealt with. Colin Brophy and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TDs rejected every one of those amendments.
Okay, I'll bring the Minister in now. What is going to change when the Pact comes into force?
So there will be major changes. Starting from tomorrow, you will see the most fundamental overhaul in how we actually deal with people arriving into the country. So people will be reporting in. They will go through an enhanced processing procedure. Most importantly, we have had situations under the previous system where people's appeals took years. We're aiming to have a 12-week to 36-week appeal process for people. That means from the moment they arrive in to the moment where they make an initial application, also including an appeal to they get a decision. The implications for that, as we get that system up and running in the, from Friday onwards and start dealing with everybody in that, is that we will require fewer iPass centres. We will be able to close down those iPass centres, and we'll be processing people through. That is a radical change.
Yeah, but as Matt Carthy points out, you don't need to sign up to a European Pact to do that.
But what you actually do and get the huge benefit of, because we're doing it in conjunction with our European partners, when someone arrives into the European Union, they will go through a process, and that will be their initial process point. And if they then rock up to another EU member state, they can be returned to the original member state from which they started the process. There was an element to that in the previous process. It was actually ironically called the Dublin process, but it wasn't working, and it wasn't working effectively. And what is important to recognise is that this is a enhanced version of the of dealing with migration, which Europe has always dealt with collectively. But we, particularly as a member state, which is why we opted in, we believe the huge benefits for us are that we will actually get to have that enhanced process. We will get to have that right of return for people who started their application in the member state, and we will make sure that migrants are dealt with in a manner, in a way, which is what I've always believed, which is that we must have a firm, fair and effective system for people coming into our country.
Just before I bring Matt Carthy back in, he made the point that we have a common travel area with Britain. Britain is no longer in the EU. Britain is not part of this pact. Does that not undermine what's going to happen?
No, the pact is a very strong EU measure, but we also work day in, day out. Myself and Minister O'Callaghan work with our opposite numbers in the UK. The officials of both governments work on migration issues, and the migration forces and PSNI and An Garda Síochána collectively work, and we are very much in favour of enhanced cooperation with the UK. We believe that we want, and I presume Matt doesn't want anything different, that we want to maintain our open border. Our open border is very important for the people of this island, but we also want to make sure, and we want to see a level of checks and security that makes sure that that border is not abused. It's not an open border for migrants to move. Neither was it an open border for terrorists to move across or people to smuggle drugs or to smuggle diesel. All of those have always been dealt with by an enforcing and policing measure, and we want to see enhanced cooperation with the UK on this area, including on the movement of migrants.
Okay, Matt Carthy, if we could bring you back in. I mean, the alternative to enhanced cooperation with the UK authorities that the Minister is talking about there is a hard border on the island of Ireland, which I presume nobody wants to see.
Well, actually, there's probably no bigger area that United Ireland wouldn't bring immediate benefits and efficiencies, because it is clear as an island nation the best way to manage migration is on an all-Ireland basis, and we should be pursuing that on an ongoing basis. We should also be pursuing a bilateral arrangement with Britain. Enhanced cooperation means nothing if you don't actually have a returns agreement in place, and the difficulty is that Colm and Jim and the government have been concentrating all of their efforts on an EU framework that doesn't take into account the mechanism by which the majority of people who seek international protection in this state actually come. There's a number of areas that need to just be clarified again. It is possible within the EU framework to sign into those measures in which we need to have an EU framework, namely, and I'll repeat this, the sharing of information and a returns policy. And it is quite possible, and how do we know that? Because of what the previous government did in the successor to the EU Migration Pact. It opted into those areas in which it was necessary in order to have those procedures in place, and it opted out, as is our right, under Protocol 21, which was put in place precisely because we operate outside of Schengen and we are operating within a common travel area. The Irish government, because they wanted, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, wanted to be able to say we're doing something about migration, locked us in whole scale to the EU Pact, which means that the ability of Irish governments to be flexible into the future to changing needs and dynamics in relation to migration flows, that is now taking away from the Oireachtas, the elected representatives of the people. And if we don't get to a point where we actually have a bilateral arrangement with Britain, which in my view will be more difficult to secure because we're locked into the EU Migration Pact, well then we are going to see a continued dysfunction. We are going to see the lengthy processing times and appeal times, and potentially what we will get as a people in return for having a dysfunctional IPAS system is infringement fines coming from the European Union because we haven't been able to meet the standards that we have signed up to in the Migration Pact.